What if I told you that one of history's greatest crimes didn't begin with bullets? It began with a story. A story repeated so many times that millions of ordinary people accepted it as truth. No one could imagine that within just a few years, neighbors would stop trusting neighbors, children would be taught to hate classmates, and families who had lived peacefully for generations would become targets of one of the deadliest genocides in human history. But here's the question that still haunts historians today. Why did Adolf Hitler target the Jewish people? Was it personal hatred? Political strategy? Or something far more dangerous, the power of fear combined with propaganda? Stay until the end, because the answer isn't just about the past. It reveals how an entire society slowly lost its ability to tell truth from lies. Germany, 1918. The First World War had ended, and the country was exhausted. Millions of soldiers never returned home. Factories closed. Families struggled to find food. Inflation became so extreme that people carried stacks of money just to buy a loaf of bread. Parents watched their savings become worthless overnight. Imagine working your entire life, saving every paycheck, only to wake up one morning and discover that everything you own can't even buy dinner. For millions of Germans, that wasn't imagination. It was reality. People were angry, confused, humiliated. They wanted someone to explain why their lives had fallen apart. History shows that in moments of fear, simple answers become incredibly attractive. And that is exactly where Adolf Hitler entered the picture. He wasn't born into power. He wasn't a military genius. He wasn't even a successful artist. But he understood something that many politicians never fully grasped. People don't always follow facts. They follow emotions. Hitler stood before enormous crowds and promised certainty. He promised jobs. He promised pride. He promised that Germany would become powerful again. Every speech was carefully designed to make listeners feel that their pain had a single cause and that he alone had the solution. Crowds grew larger every month. Thousands became hundreds of thousands. Eventually, millions believed him. But every movement built on fear needs an enemy. Instead of explaining the complicated realities of war, economics, and international politics, Nazi propaganda offered a much simpler story. It blamed Jewish people. Not because evidence pointed toward them, but because propaganda works best when it creates a clear villain. This idea wasn't completely new. Anti-Jewish prejudice had existed in parts of Europe for centuries through religious discrimination, false stereotypes, and conspiracy theories. The Nazis took those old prejudices and transformed them into a modern political weapon. Newspapers repeated the same accusations. Radio broadcasts repeated the same accusations. Posters repeated the same accusations. Schools repeated the same accusations. Even children's books portrayed Jewish people as dangerous outsiders. Think about that for a moment. If every teacher, every newspaper, every government official, and every public poster tells the same story every single day, how many people would eventually stop questioning it? That is the real power of propaganda. It doesn't need everyone to become hateful overnight. It only needs people to become comfortable with small changes. First comes suspicion. Then separation. Then discrimination. Then silence. And finally, violence. By 1933, Hitler had become Chancellor of Germany. Many citizens believed he would simply restore order. Instead, democracy began disappearing piece by piece. Independent newspapers were shut down. Political opponents were arrested. Critics disappeared. Fear spread faster than any law. Ordinary people learned that asking the wrong question could cost them their jobs, their freedom, or even their lives. So many remained silent. Not because they agreed with everything happening, but because fear is often louder than courage. Soon, Jewish businesses became targets. Customers stopped entering stores. Doctors lost patients. Lawyers lost clients. Professors were dismissed from universities. Teachers were removed from classrooms. Families who had considered themselves proud German citizens suddenly discovered that their country no longer accepted them. Nothing about their character had changed. Nothing about their loyalty had changed. Only the government's narrative had changed. And millions accepted it. Then came one of the most important turning points. In 1935, the Nazi government introduced the Nuremberg Laws. These laws stripped Jewish citizens of fundamental rights and legally separated them from the rest of society. Friendships became dangerous. Marriages were restricted. Opportunities disappeared. The discrimination that had once existed in speeches was now written into law. Imagine a child asking their parents a simple question. Why can't I go to school with my best friend anymore? How do you answer that? How do you explain hatred to someone too young to understand politics? Across Germany, thousands of families faced impossible conversations like these. Yet many still believed the situation would improve. After all, Germany was known for its universities, scientists, musicians, philosophers, and engineers. Surely a civilized nation would never allow hatred to go too far. But history often moves so slowly that people fail to recognize danger until it surrounds them. Then came the night that changed everything. November 9, 1938. Synagogues burned across cities. Jewish-owned businesses were smashed. Homes were attacked. Thousands of innocent people were arrested. The streets filled with broken glass, giving the event its infamous name, the Night of Broken Glass. For countless families, this was the moment hope began disappearing. Parents packed small bags. Children clutched toys. Grandparents stared silently at homes they might never see again. Some escaped. Many could not. Countries around the world accepted only limited numbers of refugees, leaving thousands trapped with nowhere to go. Every decision carried unimaginable consequences. Stay or leave. Hide or trust. Hope or fear. No family knew which choice would save their lives. And while the world watched events unfold with growing concern, Nazi leaders were preparing something far more systematic than discrimination. Something that would transform prejudice into industrialized murder. A plan that would forever redefine humanity's understanding of evil. And in the next part, we'll uncover how propaganda became genocide, how millions of lives were destroyed, and why the lessons of this history remain urgently relevant today. The broken glass had already been swept from the streets. The smoke had faded. The headlines disappeared. And to many people outside Germany, it seemed like the worst was over. But behind closed doors, something far more terrifying was taking shape. The violence that the world could see was only the beginning. The violence that the world couldn't see would soon claim millions of lives. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, World War II officially began. As Nazi forces marched across Europe, they gained control over countries that were home to millions of Jewish families. Entire communities that had existed for hundreds of years suddenly found themselves under Nazi rule. At first, people were ordered to register. Then they were forced to wear yellow Star of David badges. The purpose wasn't practical. It was psychological. The badge instantly separated one group from another. It transformed neighbors into targets. A simple walk to the market became an act of fear. Children who once played together suddenly stood on opposite sides of a street. Shop owners refused service. Friends looked away. Silence spread everywhere. Soon, Jewish families were forced into crowded ghettos surrounded by walls and guards. Thousands of people lived in tiny apartments designed for only a few families. Food became scarce. Disease spread rapidly. Parents skipped meals so their children could eat. Children searched garbage piles hoping to find a piece of bread. Yet even in those impossible conditions, teachers secretly held classes. Musicians played forbidden concerts. Doctors treated patients without medicine. People celebrated birthdays with almost nothing. because holding onto humanity became an act of resistance. But while families struggled simply to survive, Nazi leaders gathered in meetings to discuss what they called the final solution. Those words sounded bureaucratic, almost ordinary. But behind them was an extraordinary horror. The plan was the systematic destruction of Europe's Jewish population. Not through random violence, not through isolated attacks, but through an organized state machine involving transportation systems, government offices, police forces, military units, and massive concentration and extermination camps. Human beings became numbers. Names became records. Lives became statistics. Trains carried families across Europe. Many passengers believed they were being relocated for work. Parents comforted frightened children. Grandparents carried family photographs. Nobody knew that many of those journeys would be their last. When the train doors opened, confusion quickly turned into terror. They came from different countries. They spoke different languages. They had different dreams. Some wanted to become doctors. Some wanted to become musicians. Some wanted nothing more than to watch their children grow up. Every single victim represented an entire future that would never exist. But Jewish people were not the only victims. The Nazi regime also persecuted and murdered millions of others, including Roma communities, people with disabilities, political opponents, Soviet prisoners of war, Jehovah's Witnesses, and many others whom the regime considered undesirable. The Holocaust became one of history's most devastating examples of what happens when a government combines absolute power with hatred and propaganda. One question still troubles historians today. How could so many ordinary people participate? The answer is uncomfortable. Most were not powerful leaders. Many were clerks processing paperwork, railway workers scheduling trains, police officers following orders, officials signing documents. Others simply chose not to ask questions. History demonstrates that extraordinary crimes are often enabled not only by fanatics but also by indifference, fear, and conformity. Yet even in the darkest moments, courage survived. Some families hid complete strangers inside their homes, knowing discovery could mean execution. Teachers protected children. Religious leaders forged documents. Resistance groups smuggled families across borders. Individuals risked everything to save people they had never met. One life at a time. Their actions remind us that while hatred can spread quickly, compassion can survive even under impossible circumstances. By 1945, Nazi Germany collapsed. Allied soldiers entered concentration camps and discovered scenes almost beyond belief. Starving survivors. Abandoned belongings. Suitcases labeled with family names. Children's shoes stacked in enormous piles. The evidence revealed the scale of a crime that shocked the world. In the years that followed, the Nuremberg trials brought many leading Nazi officials to justice. For the first time, international courts declared that individuals could be held accountable for crimes against humanity, even when those crimes were committed under government authority. But no trial could restore the millions of lives that had been lost. No verdict could return parents to children or children to parents. Today, museums, memorials, and survivor testimonies exist for one reason. Not to keep hatred alive, but to keep memory alive. Because forgetting history creates space for misinformation, prejudice, and conspiracy theories to return. The story of why Hitler targeted Jewish people is ultimately not about one man's hatred alone. It is about the danger of blaming an entire community for a nation's problems. It is about the destructive power of propaganda repeated until lies begin to sound like truth. It is about what can happen when fear replaces critical thinking and when people stop seeing one another as human beings. And perhaps the most important lesson is this: the Holocaust did not begin with gas chambers. It began with words, with stereotypes, with discrimination that seemed small enough for many people to ignore. History's darkest chapters rarely start with violence. They start with the normalization of hatred. That is why this story continues to matter, not only as a record of the past, but as a warning for the future. Because every generation inherits the same responsibility, to question easy answers, to reject collective blame, and to remember that the value of a human life is never determined by religion, ethnicity, or identity. Only by our shared humanity. History is often remembered through dates, battles, and political leaders. But behind every statistic was a human being, a child with dreams, a mother protecting her family, a father hoping to return home. The Holocaust reminds us how dangerous hatred becomes when it is accepted as normal. If this story taught you something new, share it with someone else, because remembering history is one of the strongest ways to prevent it from repeating itself. And if you enjoy well-researched historical documentaries that uncover the truth behind the world's biggest